The Iraqi government says it's entered the second phase of a campaign to retake Anbar province from ISIL fighters. But as Mohammed Jamjoon reports from Baghdad, analysts are skeptical about just how well the battle is going.
On the front lines, Iraqi security forces battle ISIL one shot at a time. Despite the government's promises to recapture Ramadi quickly, the battle has, so far, been slow. While the Defense Ministry insists things are going well and have moved on to phase 2 of its strategy there, part of the larger Anbar offensive, some analysts are skeptical.
I believe ISIL in Ramadi is still strong and the joint Iraqi forces are still weak. They haven't been able to put an end to that organization in the 70 days since the start of the Anbar offensive.
The Defense Ministry maintains its security forces are fighting as effectively as possible. But scenes like this, in which a shoulder-mounted rocket-propelled grenade launcher is handled incorrectly by a member of the Popular Mobilization Forces, which are helping the government, seem to underscore questions regarding how well trained these men are. Still, no matter how competent they are at warfare, the intensity of this struggle would leave most fighters worn out. These days, Iraq's government faces a convergence of crises. One on the battlefield, the other in the court of public opinion, as tens of thousands of fed-up Iraqis continue demonstrating against corruption and demanding a return of basic services, including electricity and air conditioning. While Iraq's Prime Minister Haider al-Abadi and its parliament have been quick to pass sweeping reform measures, many Iraqis say that's not near enough. Protesters have vowed to keep coming out into the streets no matter how hot it gets and no matter how long it takes. Many say it's actions and not words that ultimately count.
It seems like the reform list and the decrees and the ratification of these proposals by the government is like ink on paper. Protesters are waiting for implementation of these reforms, and if no action is taken, the protests will develop into sit-ins.
Now, Prime Minister Abadi isn't just promising to cut corruption, he insists he'll also improve security by court-martialing officers who abandoned their posts in Ramadi when ISIL stormed the city in April. But it's not clear yet what effect that may have on these weary fighters and a wary public. Mohammed Jamjoon, Al Jazeera, Baghdad.
The United Nations Security Council has given its unanimous support to a plan to get peace talks started on Syria. All 15 members approved a statement that paves the way for UN Special Envoy Staffan de Mistura to progress with his plan to find a political solution to the conflict. Inside Syria, the military has launched more airstrikes on a rebel-held area near the capital, Damascus. On Sunday, more than 100 people were killed in a bombing at a marketplace. It was one of the worst incidents since the war began more than 4 years ago. The Arab League is holding an extraordinary meeting in Cairo to discuss the crisis in the Libyan city of Sirte. The meeting was requested by Libya's internationally recognized government, which is based in Tobruk. It says only airstrikes from Arab states can prevent ISIL's full takeover of Sirte, which it has largely controlled since May. All parties in Yemen's civil war have displayed a flagrant disregard for civilian lives. That's according to human rights group Amnesty International. In a new report, they accuse both the Saudi-led coalition and fighters on the ground of leading a trail of destruction which may amount to war crimes. Amnesty says since March, close to 4,000 people have been killed in Yemen, half of them civilians. Both Houthi rebels and anti-Houthi armed groups have routinely launched attacks into densely populated residential areas. And Saudi-led coalition airstrikes have hit civilian areas with often no military target nearby. Rasha Mohammed is a Yemen researcher with Amnesty International. She's live for us from London. Rasha, this is a shocking report that's been compiled here. Tell us how you gathered the evidence.
So a delegation of 2 people visited Yemen in June and July, and we visited Taiz and Aden in order to gather this evidence. And the evidence is displayed clearly in this report. You can see that the impact of the coalition airstrikes on civilians and the ground attacks by Houthi and anti-Houthi armed groups, civilians are bearing the brunt for this conflict.
Judging by the very graphic details that can be found in your report, it seems that those researchers were there almost as the attacks were happening, or certainly very soon afterwards.
Yes, we were there during the time that attacks were happening. We witnessed on the ground attacks being launched from inside and near civilian neighborhoods, near and inside schools, from near hospitals. And these attacks open the leeway for the other armed group to attack, and attacks of reprisal. So the issue has been that all armed groups have not respected international humanitarian law, and they're operating out of civilian areas, and they're launching attacks from and towards those areas, which could amount to war crimes.
Okay, so give us some ideas of what sort of situations we're talking about here. First of all, tell us about how the Houthi rebels may have committed a war crime.
Well, all sides of the conflict have not respected international humanitarian law. The armed groups on the ground are launching attacks, such as the Houthi rebels attacking civilian areas. Now, the anti-Houthi fighters are operating out of civilian areas. They launch these attacks. So the Houthi fighters would reply with another attack. An example would be, we visited certain areas in North Aden, in Gharbiya and Sharqiya, where neighbors are living next to schools where anti-Houthi fighters are operating from and launching attacks from. Therefore, the Houthi rebels would reply towards this school, and it puts the whole neighborhood and civilians at risk of attacks.
Okay, and now let's go to the other side, the Saudi-led coalition airstrikes. How might they have flouted international law?
So far, what we've seen on the ground, we've looked into 8 different airstrikes just around Taiz and Aden and Lahaj, north of Aden. And these attacks could amount to war crimes, because the problem with the airstrikes is they don't seem to differentiate between civilian objects and military objects. It's not quite clear what were the objectives of targeting things such as mosques, schools and markets. For example, we visited one school where 16 families of internally displaced people were living and were trying to escape the conflict in their village. That very school where they were escaping and sheltering got targeted by a Saudi-led coalition airstrike. There's no military objectives as far as we can see near that school, and it's not clear why it was targeted.
Okay, Rashid Mohammed, thank you very much for detailing a little bit more that Amnesty report for us. Let's now cross to Ahmed Alibrahim. He's a political and security analyst based in Saudi Arabia, joins us live from Riyadh. First of all, let's get your reaction, or the reaction there in Saudi, to this Amnesty report.
Well, of course, we are all saddened about this Amnesty report, and I agree these measurements need to be stepped up, and we need to protect, or they need to work on protecting more civilians, and this is unacceptable. Saudi Arabia and the Led Coalition, they are not in the business of killing innocent people. I think the Houthis, who are to blame and who are liable for all these children and women death.
Okay, you say the Saudi-led coalition is not in the business of killing innocent women and children. However, they are. Amnesty's question there, I put to you, why is this coalition targeting with airstrikes mosques, schools, marketplaces, where there obviously are civilians?
Well, this is no stranger. Saudi Arabia did not invent that, or Saudi Arabia is not in the business of actually going into war and bombing innocent people. Saudi Arabia today and the coalition, their accuracy is much bigger and better than the American, British-led coalition on Iraq in 2003.
But clearly not
so the
accurate
people is
enough.
to blame. Well, there's no war that is accurate enough when you have the Houthis actually hiding women and children and minor people and weapon in a mosque or in a school, or starting putting all the 50 millimeters weapons on top of the roof of the mosques.
Okay, there were no obvious military targets at any of these sites. Were they mistakes to bomb and to target these sites?
I think in every war there is a mistake, but the mistake in this case, it's very minimal. The major thing is that you need to understand that the Houthis, they are very good in hiding their weapons, their military, putting some weapons on the roof and starting shooting on the planes of the coalition. Of course, when you get attacked by a ground airstrike,
I wouldn't say that's minimal.
Well, the Saudi coalition, they did not kill 141 civilians.
That's what Amnesty says in its report.
Well, the Amnesty needs to spend more time on the ground.
I think it was on the ground when these strikes were happening.
It's not enough. They cannot make these assessments from sitting in the United Kingdom. And the Amnesty, they should have actually made these same reports that they are accusing the Saudi-led coalition by being the reason, by killing those innocent women and children. They need to look at more regions in the world. I mean, I'm
but we're not here. In this interview, in just this 3 minutes, we're talking about Saudi and we're talking about Yemen. Would you welcome a United Nations International Commission of Inquiry if you admit that these are simply mistakes in the fog of war?
Saudi Arabia and the coalition, they are welcome the United Nations. They are part of this dome and they work on this approval and with the international community. There is no doubt that Saudi Arabia would work with the United Nations, would work with the Amnesty to define and to prove that the Houthis, the people are responsible for killing those innocent people, is not Saudi Arabia and the coalition party. And this is one flight to Saudi Arabia and the coalition party by the Amnesty.
Ahmed Alibrahim, we welcome your thoughts. Thank you very much for joining us there from Riyadh.
Thank you.
Let's get all the weather with Rob now, and we're over to